hold on to your hats, because this is big. Keir Starmer has just been caught in a secret letter to his cabinet admitting something Labour has refused to acknowledge for years, that immigration concerns from working-class Britons have been ignored for far too long. And guess what? This isn't just an admission, it's a full-blown strategy shift, a desperate attempt to claw back votes from Nigel Farage's Reform UK, which is shaking up the political landscape like never before. Yes, the party that once dismissed immigration worries as dog whistles is now scrambling to sound tough on borders. In this explosive 1,500-word letter leaked to GB News, Starmer tore into his own party's past mistakes. He admitted that Labour had been too scared to call out the obvious problems with economic migration. His words, not ours. He said that the political class had been too detached from reality, acting as though all immigration was an untrammeled good, and that attitude had driven a wedge between working-class Britons and the so-called progressive elites. And here's where things take a jaw-dropping turn. Starmer slammed his own ministers for looking down on working-class Brits who dared to voice concerns. That's right, after years of Labour dismissing anyone critical of immigration as bigots or ignorant, Starmer is now suddenly declaring that ministers must stop patronising voters. But let's be real, do we actually believe this change of heart? Or is this just panic mode as Reform UK surges ahead of Labour in some polls? Now, if that wasn't enough, Starmer went even further. He shared an anecdote about a woman in Oldham, deeply worried about antisocial behaviour caused by young migrant men from Europe. But before she could even express her concerns, she felt she had to prove she wasn't racist by showing him photos of a wedding she attended for her Asian neighbours. Think about that. A British citizen felt so afraid to discuss immigration issues with a Labour politician that she had to prove she wasn't a racist first, and Starmer calls that devastating. Well, here's a thought. Who created that culture? Who pushed the idea that immigration concerns were nasty and prejudiced? Who stood by while working-class Brits were shamed, silenced, and dismissed for daring to say that open borders were unsustainable? Now that Labour is losing ground to Reform UK, suddenly the party wants to listen. Suddenly, Starmer is on a mission to reconnect with ordinary people. But are voters going to buy it? And let's talk about Reform UK, because Starmer made sure to take a massive swing at them in his letter. He painted the party as dangerous right-wing populists, accusing them of pushing a flat taxation system that benefits millionaires, charging people for NHS services, and even cozying up to Vladimir Putin. Yes, you heard that right. Starmer is now linking reform to Putin. The desperation is off the charts. But here's the reality. Reform UK's rise is not about Putin, taxes, or even Nigel Farage's media presence. It's about one thing: working-class Britain feeling ignored, betrayed, and forgotten. And no amount of carefully worded letters from Starmer is going to undo the years of Labour treating these voters like an inconvenience. Reform's message is landing because Labour abandoned these people first. And this is where things get even murkier. Because while Starmer is now claiming to be the champion of working Brits, his own government is refusing to come clean about the extent of the deportation crisis. Yes, the Home Office has flat out refused to reveal how many deportations have been blocked due to European human rights laws. And why? Because apparently it would be a disproportionate cost to collect the data. What an absolute joke. The government has the resources to track every single speech crime, every mean tweet, every climate protest, and every TV licence dodger, but when it comes to how many foreign criminals and illegal migrants have successfully dodged deportation, suddenly they can't be bothered to check. It's no secret that thousands of deportations never happen because of European human rights appeals, and some of the cases are so ludicrous they'd be funny if they weren't real. Remember the Albanian criminal who avoided deportation because his son had an aversion to foreign chicken nuggets? Or the Pakistani paedophile who was allowed to stay because deporting him would be too harsh on his children? This is the system the Home Office is now covering up. Steve Barclay, the former cabinet minister, called them out in Parliament, demanding to know exactly how many criminals and illegal migrants won appeals based on human rights grounds. But the response? Silence. They won't release the data because they know the public outrage would be uncontrollable. And guess who wants the UK out of the ECHR altogether? That's right, Reform UK. Farage and his allies have been making this case for years, and now it's becoming impossible to ignore. Why should Britain be tied to a system that makes deporting criminals harder? And while we're on the topic of betrayals, let's talk about how Labour's policies are now squeezing pensioners like never before. This week, a furious pensioner named William Pickup went on an absolute tear, calling out Starmer's government for lying to pensioners about energy bills and taxation. This man didn't hold back. He blasted Labour Labour for making empty promises on energy costs, while pensioners like him struggle to keep warm. And, to add insult to injury, the government is now dragging millions of pensioners into taxation for the first time ever. That's right, thanks to the tax threshold freeze, state pensioners will now be taxed on their income for the first time in history. A state pension that was meant to be untouchable is now being raided by Labour. And this isn't a small group, it's millions of people, many of whom have worked hard all their lives and now face new tax bills they never expected. But Labour isn't stopping there. They've also frozen housing benefits until 2026, meaning that pensioners renting privately are getting squeezed from both sides. And don't even get us started on winter fuel payments, which have now been slashed for all but the absolute poorest retirees. So let's put it all together. Labour ignored voters on immigration for years until Reform UK started scaring them in the polls. Labour let foreign criminals dodge deportation and now refuses to reveal how bad it really is. And Labour is squeezing pensioners dry while pretending to stand up for ordinary people. But here's the real question. Are people still buying it? Starmer's sudden shift on immigration isn't about principle, it's about panic. Labour sees the Reform UK threat growing and they're scrambling to stop it. But is it too late? Let us know in the comments. Is Labour finally listening, or is this just more spin? And if you want the truth about the political chaos unfolding in Britain, make sure you're subscribed, because this fight is just beginning. Buckle up, folks, because the chaos in Westminster just hit another level. Keir Starmer thought he could pull off a sudden U-turn on immigration, but guess what? It's backfiring badly. Reform UK is surging ahead, and Labour's panic mode is in full swing. Now, instead of just attacking Reform's policies, Starmer is going after the voters themselves. Yes, you heard that right. Labour is scrambling to win back working-class Brits by admitting they were ignored for years. But let's not forget, it wasn't just ignoring them. Labour mocked them. Labour insulted them. Anyone who raised concerns about mass migration was smeared as xenophobic or far-right. And now, because Reform UK is gaining steam, suddenly Starmer wants to listen. And if you thought Starmer's leaked letter was desperate, his latest comments are even worse. He's blaming Brexit voters for being misled and claiming that Reform UK is lying to them about immigration and the economy. Here we go. Labour's classic move. If people don't vote Labour, it's not because Labour is failing them, it's because the voters are stupid and tricked. How insulting is that? But here's the kicker. Reform UK isn't the only threat Starmer is facing. Labour MPs are now turning on him. Yes, you heard that right. Labour's own MPs are furious over this sudden change in messaging. The party's pro-migration, ultra-woke factions are in absolute meltdown, accusing Starmer of betraying Labour's core values. So now he's stuck between two fires, working-class Brits who don't trust him and Labour's far-left activists who hate him. And just when you thought things couldn't get any worse for Labour, here comes the Home Office deportation scandal, which they are refusing to talk about. The ECHR is blocking deportations, and the government is refusing to reveal the numbers. How many foreign criminals are walking our streets because of these loopholes? We don't know because they won't tell us. And let's not forget, it's British taxpayers who are footing the bill for all of this. We have hard-working people struggling to pay rent, pensioners barely able to afford heating, and yet the government still finds endless resources to protect criminals from deportation. Make it make sense. But it gets even worse, because now Labour's pension betrayal is coming to light. Millions of retirees are about to be hit with taxes on their pensions for the first time ever. Labour's tax threshold freeze means that pensioners who should never have been taxed in the first place are now getting caught in the system. And what is Keir Starmer saying about it? Nothing. Absolute silence. And the people who built this country, paid their dues, and worked their whole lives are now being left to struggle, all while Labour pushes welfare handouts for people who have contributed nothing.